It's the Fellowship of the Geek Show, a weekly podcast about comics, the comic book industry, and other geek pop culture. Music courtesy of Manny the Martyr. And now, on with the show! Hey everybody, it's the Fellowship of the Geeks podcast. My name is Thomas Chick, and joining me for this episode is Mike Marlowe.
Hey gang.
And Les Webster.
We're here, where are you?
He just flew back in, and boy, is his arms tired. So how are you guys doing?
I'm back. I'm good.
He's happy to not be in paradise anymore.
He's happy to get off the planes.
Oh,
he's happy to be able to get on planes and get off the planes.
Right.
Oh,
Just happy
that's
to have
true.
a decent airport experience for a change. No kidding.
I don't think it was the airport. It was actual airplanes.
Yeah.
If they actually function.
It's always nice when they work. Yeah, that's good.
Oh yeah.
It's a plus.
Hope everybody out there is doing well. So what's been going on in your corner of the galaxy?
Well, since you mentioned Galaxy,
Woohoo!
now I want to preface this
Uh-oh.
by it's cool. By sharing the fact that I don't binge watch stuff. I just don't have it in me. I can't bear down and watch a whole lot of something all at once. I just burn out on it. So I usually am like watching 5 or 6 different things at a time. And I say this because I know I mentioned not long ago that I'm watching the Batman animated series. But I'm also watching Star Trek: The Next Generation. And
Okay.
after, I don't know, what's probably a year and a half now, I'm about halfway through season 3. But it's been fun. I've actually watched a few of them lately, and the deal is I had never gone back and watched all 7 seasons. I had watched most of them when they were on. I watched like all of seasons 1 and 2 and then caught the rest like over the next 10 years because that after season 2 was about the time I went to college, and where we were we're kind of out in the boonies, but cable was only like $15 a month back then, because show tells you how far back into the past this was.
Mm-hmm.
And then on top of that, we got like small local rural TV stations from, I don't know, there were 3 or 4 of them, and so they all carried it, and so you could watch any particular episode you wanted of Next Generation that you wanted to watch. You could watch any of about 14 times throughout the course of a week. So I caught quite a bit of it, but not quite all. I haven't quite gotten to the point where I'm picking up episodes I don't remember at all, but I'll get there.
I'm kind of like that with Firefly. And then, of course, Farscape.
See, yeah, Farscape was one of the shows that taught me this lesson of mine that I can't binge watch things, because I kind of binge watched the first 2 seasons of Farscape and then I just couldn't take it anymore, and I've never gone back. So, I kind of regret that at this point, but someday I will try to go back. But yeah, I burned out on it really hard, and this was 4 or 5 years ago. I just have never been able to watch them again.
Pretty cool. It's been a while since it's funny because I know they're shown a lot on some networks, and I don't really stop down and watch them like I used to. I mean, I happened to catch the episode Family, and just kind of refresher. It was the episode after the 2-parter of Picard being kidnapped by the Borg and turned into it. And this is the kind of the epilogue where they came back home for repairs, and he went home to see his brother, and Worf's adopted parents came on the Enterprise and all that.
Yeah.
And I sat down and watched that. And that's such a great episode. And there's a lot of great episodes on that show, but it just For some strange reason, I just cannot. I can't make myself sit down and watch them like I can classic Trek. And I think that's with all of them. And I'm not sure. I'm not sure what the deal is. I guess just my nostalgia or whatever.
Yeah, I mean, and watching them now, I mean, in all honesty, they're a bit dated. And oddly enough, they're like more dated than the original series, as far as I'm concerned. I mean, granted, I have a special kind of bond with the original series, but
Mm.
I watched all of them before I started watching these. But
Yeah.
there's only 3 seasons of them, so it's not as big a deal. But yeah, there's a lot of the 80s in the Next Generation, and it's a little off-putting for me because I really hated the 80s, and so it's I don't know. I'm managing. That's part of. I'm taking my time so that I don't burn out on the whole 80s thing, and I'm hoping it transitions out of the 80s at some point. But I mean, season 3 was like 1989, so
Yeah.
I got a little ways to go.
All right. Cool. How about you, Les?
I'm back. I had 2 weeks of no comic books. I was having withdrawal. Like, God, I made it back here. And that's about it.
Now you're in catch-up mode.
Mm-hmm.
Ready for it, yes.
Oh, you haven't even been to the shop yet?
I've been to the shop, but I haven't purchased anything yet.
Nah, he's been up to the shop to help me out. That's about it. Woohoo! And it's much appreciated.
Well, thanks.
Well, I picked up a book last week, and there is one available for Les. It's waiting for him. Called Wonder Woman: A Celebration of 75 Years. And this is the latest in a series of hardcover collections. You know, they've done one for Superman, Batman, Luthor, Joker, Lois Lane, Flash, Green Lantern, Justice Society, and Shazam. I think that's all of them. That may not be. So the latest in line is Wonder Woman. Of course, it stems from her first appearance and origin up into the New 52 edition. I hadn't had a chance to read a lot of it, but I've read some of the older stuff. I had read her origin before. I mean, the first story is her origin, obviously. The second one's her meeting Steve Trevor. Third one was kind of interesting because it was kind of a future story, if I remember correctly. But I thought it was funny because, like, the third panel, you have Diana and her mother, the Queen, and Queen's asking, "Why are you so excited?" And Diana goes, "Mother, a woman will be president in 3000." I'm like, "Whoa, okay." Kind of forward thinking there by Chester, but wow,
Cool.
not until 3000. Okay.
When you're doing stuff like that, you got to hedge your bets a little bit. I mean, come on.
Well, I mean, a mutual friend of ours, Wes, has always pointed out the one episode of Laugh In where Rowan and who's it?
Martin.
Who's it? Rowan and Martin are they're doing kind of the news from the future, and it was Dateline sometime in the 80s, and they say President Reagan, and everybody laughs. I'm like, that actually happened.
And this was in 1968, which,
yes, 68.
admittedly, I think he was.
Yeah, he was
running
like
for governor. I think he
Yeah.
was running for governor. I don't know if he was actually governor yet of California
Yeah.
at the time, but yeah. And there was
Yeah.
this huge, President Ronald Reagan, and there's this huge laugh. I remember seeing that. I was probably there when he saw that.
Probably. It was just like less than 20 years later it actually happened, and so, so anyway, it was kind of funny, but there was some good stuff. Of course, a little bit from Perez Run and Gail Simone and Phil Jimenez, the more recent stuff. Of course, the first issue of her doing the whole Diana Rigg thing where she doesn't have her powers, so she's not running around in the red, white, and blue, but she's doing the whole white suit thing, which caused a lot of controversy.
That was the new Wonder Woman, wasn't it?
That was the new Wonder Woman. Yeah. So, some good stuff.
That is cool.
Yep.
History's neat.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I always enjoy these because you can kind of see how the character has progressed over the decades and just how differently they can be between writers. It's a lot more evident in something like this than some other collections. So
sure, you're getting bigger leaps of time.
Yep.
In between, makes it more obvious.
Yep. So for this week's episode, we are continuing our horror theme, and we decided to choose some of our favorite pieces of horror literature. And I believe, Mikey, are you leading off with your first choice?
So that's what you told me you had written down in your notes.
Okay. All right.
Wow. Back the bus. Back the bus.
Got to break the fourth wall a little. Come on now. Wouldn't be fun otherwise. Yeah, and I'm going to go with a very old classic.
Okay.
I'm going with Frankenstein.
Woohoo.
The original book, published in 1817 or so, somewhere in there. And most people know the legend. 1818. I was close. Most people know the legend, but in case you don't, I will do the short version, in which Mary Shelley and her husband, Percy, who was a fairly renowned poet of the time, and their friend Lord Byron, who was an extremely renowned poet of the time, and Byron's traveling companion, who was a physician named Polidori, are traveling Europe, and they are in Italy on this one particular dark and stormy night. Kid you not. This is how these sorts of cliches are born, folks. And the legend has it that one of them suggests that they each, since it's a dark and stormy night, that they each take their hand at writing a scary story. And not surprisingly, a couple of these stories that came out of this particular legend became famous, though it was not the people that you would have thought that wrote the ones that became famous. The two that became famous were written by the poet's 18-year-old wife, very recent wife, and the doctor. The one that became really famous, obviously, was Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, though the doctor's became famous as being one of the early versions of the vampire in Western literature. But that's a different show. But so yeah, Mary Shelley's gothic tale of a young German scientist who decides to find a way to create life on his own without the help of the usual partner in such endeavors has really always kind of been a staple of horror literature, and it's also really kind of always been one of my favorite books, so that's why I'm throwing it out there.
Very cool. It is a classic. I'll be honest, I have not read the book.
No, but it's one of those that you've seen at least 3 movies based on it.
Oh God, yeah. I mean, just most recently, TCM did the original and then the two follow-ups. So it was Frankenstein, Bride, and Son.
Yeah, it's funny how little that movie, the James Whale movie, is based on this book. There is very little of this book in there. And the deal is that's cool because, I mean, I believe that was the first of what is known as the Universal Monsters movies.
Mm-hmm. I think so.
I think that came out before Dracula. They both came out in 1931. I think Frankenstein was out first. So it's one of those that is, the story is only loosely based on the novel, and nobody cares at this point. It's its own thing, and it actually is a pretty decent movie.
Very cool.
It was a really good book because it went further than the first movie, for one. And the ending I thought was a great way to finish a book. I'm sorry, Mike, maybe you know this. I don't recall an ending of a movie like this one, like the book did. Do you?
There was one version that they came. It may have been the Brenna version. It
Yeah, I
wasn't
was about to
exact.
mention that
It
one.
wasn't exactly the same, but it was similar. It was the same. It was kind of they kind of. It was a lot closer than any of the others. But it was. I mean, it was. It's one of those books that's. I mean, it's kind of written. Spoiler for a book that came out 200 freaking years ago. It's kind of written, or parts of it are at least written in like a journal style. And so that's the deal, is the ending, all of that ending stuff, the way that ended was all written out in a journal. And how the hell do you film that, you know? So you have to get creative. And Brenna kind of tried to stick to that and got kind of creative with it. And I thought it worked pretty well, really. But yeah, none of the others are anywhere close.
Very
Okay.
nice.
Yep. Les, what do you have?
The first one I have is from a fairly local writer, Joe R. Lansdale. He did, I think, 2 books based on the premise of The Drive-In. The Drive-In was about a group that was at a drive-in to take in a horror fest. But then things got a little overhand, and you ended up with madmen, murders, and hopefully it was only on the screen. But later, what they say is a mysterious force encloses the drive-in, and the worst in humanity comes out. And that's, to me, the horror part of the whole story. How people react when they are confined, there is no way out, and how they turn upon each other. Similar to Under the Dome by Stephen King. How people become animals and rage against one another. I enjoyed The Drive-In. It's not a long book, but it is really intense and gives you a panoramic view of people and how they react to certain things.
Especially being caged.
Yes.
Yep. Cool. Nice choice.
Mm.
My first choice is from Stephen King. I don't read a lot of Stephen King, but I have read this, and I guess it's because of what I had seen before that drew me to the book, and it's Salem's Lot.
Ah, yes.
Good choice.
It was the original miniseries with David Soul and everybody, because it was a miniseries, right? It was like 2 parts, about 4 hours or so.
Yes.
I believe so, yeah.
Okay. And for those who've not read the book or seen either the 70s miniseries or the more recent one with, was it Rob Lowe? I think it was Rob Lowe. Ryder returns to his hometown, name of Jerusalem's Lot, in Maine, if I remember correctly.
This is Stephen King. Of course it's Maine.
Yes.
Oh, yeah, of course. Yeah, duh. And just happens to show up as all of a sudden the citizens of this little town start becoming the vampires. Really, really good book. I'm trying to remember, because there was wasn't there, the vampire had ties to, who's the partner? Can y'all help me out? I'm so blanking right now.
It has been a
David
while.
Souls.
No, the vampire. His
He had
what do you call them?
he had a henchman.
The human.
His assistant.
Yeah.
His,
Wasn't he like Wasn't he like a antique stealer or something like that?
That
Uh,
could
I'm
be.
I'm trying
That could be.
I'm I'm
It's
trying to
been a long time since I read it, but yeah,
yeah
that actually
I'm
sounds right.
I'm trying to remember what was actual book and what was adapted, but it seems like but I was thinking that that was right. So, and this was Stephen King's second book, if I'm not mistaken. The second one that was published. So,
I think you're right. Yeah, Carrie was, I believe, his first.
okay, and that was a good one as well, and not on my list, but it was a good one. So,
Trivial,
yeah, it was just.
trivial
Go
trivia
ahead.
for Salem's Lot.
Sure.
Um, for those of you who haven't read a whole lot of Stephen King, the priest, whose name I can't remember from Salem's Lot, shows up later in The Dark Tower.
Oh,
If you're
really?
into that series, yes, he makes a fairly lengthy appearance. He's in there for like a book and a half near the end. But
Okay.
there's a lot of weird shit like that in the Dark Tower. There's a lot of odd crossover stuff.
Okay, that's cool.
It turns
Uh,
the way he wrote it, I'm drawing a blank on on the name of the bad guy in the Dark Tower, but he was actually also the bad guy in one or two other. That he kind of connected some of his other books back into it that way, and that was the priest was how he got Salem's Lot into it.
Was he in Needful Things?
Uh, I don't know.
I'm sorry.
I,
I may be
I didn't read that one.
talking through my hat.
yeah, I hadn't read Needful Things. I've seen the movie and I can't remember the character's name, but I hadn't read the book. So, alrighty, Mikey.
Oh, I'm up again. All right.
Mm-hmm.
Well, for my next choice, I went with something a little more, I'm gonna say nonfiction based. Um,
Okay.
just because I am such a geek and such a fan of vampires. My next choice is a book entitled In Search of Dracula: The History of Dracula and Vampires. And this was written by I want to say he was a history professor. I could be wrong on that. Back in, I don't know, several years back. I was thinking it was like the late 70s, but I could be wrong. And ultimately, what this really is a history of Dracula from Stoker's perspective in terms of Vlad the Impaler. Vlad the Impaler was a despot from like the 15th century in Eastern Europe in what would have been the closest thing to Transylvania at the time. It was Wallachia. And he was a bit of a legend in that he was impressively brutal. And the reason he was called the Impaler was because his particular form of brutality was to plant a wooden stake, I don't know, like 12, 15 feet tall, with the top end sharpened, and drop people down onto it. And there are actually ways, I don't want to get too graphic with this, but there are ways you can do that. There are places that you can kind of start that process that will not instantly kill the victim. And so, yeah, needless to say, he got really brutal with it and honestly got to the point where he was doing it to enemies and his own people alike until he was finally killed. But this was like the quote unquote historical figure that Stoker's Dracula is based on. And so this historian went back and basically wrote up not only a history of Vlad himself, but also kind of some notes on how Stoker kind of adapted him. And then there's a nice bibliography in the back that's just a ton of vampire and other horror related stuff.
Does I'm looking at the book. The author is Raymond T. McNally. Does that
Yes.
sound right?
Yes.
Okay. And what was unique about this listing, it says that it was done first published in '94
Oh, okay. I was thinking.
on Halloween.
Nice.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. Okay, I'm gonna admit something stupid here. I knew the
Admit
legend of.
away.
Watch out, Les. The best is gonna come around for you. Uh, I'm aware of the legend of Vlad the Impaler, and of course everybody knows the legend of Dracula. But just how you phrased how Vlad got his nickname, I don't know. Somehow, just right then, it clicked. Okay, so that's where we got the wooden stake to the heart thing. I don't know. I just never even thought about it before. It just.
hmm
Um,
And I'll tell you the name Dracula is a bit of a mispronunciation
of Dracula, son
of
of the.
Dracula,
Okay, which is
which
what,
is
son of the
son
dragon?
of the dragon. And the deal was that Vlad the Impaler's father was known as the dragon when he ruled.
It was just, I never thought about it before. I've seen the movies and read the books and it just accepted it as that. That's why it happened. It just nothing. I hadn't thought any more about it until you just clicked and said that right. The way you phrased that was, oh, okay. So,
hmm
He
hmm
was
well,
an extremely vicious person.
yeah.
He was, and not to go there, but there were reasons for that. He spent most of his reign, and I say reign, it was actually technically reigns. He was removed from power a couple of times and then got it back. He actually reigned 3 times. But he was at war with the Turks most of his reign, and the Turks overwhelmingly outnumbered his entire nation, much less his army, and so he had reason to be brutal. There were hints by the end of his life that he had kind of maybe gone off the deep end a little bit, and like I said, was actually impaling his own people for various reasons, including like very minor crimes. But there you go.
I like it.
Yep.
And another fun little, well, I don't know if it's fun, you decide. Side note: this is a book that I have taken to work at times and set on my desk and told people that it's that I use it for management tips.
Very good.
Wow. Okay. Awesome.
Usually they think it's funny, mainly because they don't believe me, but and they shouldn't. I'm totally full of it on that one. Just in case anybody's listening that might care.
Awesome. That's a great choice. Les.
My second one is going back to Stephen King, and I think I even mentioned it on our last episode, and that was the book It. This one fascinated me in its premise and the idea, once again, to make a clown the vicious, evil persona was fantastic. We know very few people that are not afraid of clowns in one form or another. And this one just drove it home. The characters, as I think I've said, are adults and they're trying to remember how they defeated the clown as children. And it's not all coming back to them. They have to redevise a way to kill the entity. And this one is both a page turner and one of those page turners you better have the lights on as you read it. Because you can really get spooked by it.
Mm.
Yeah, and unfortunately, it's a little on the kind of more topical than you'd like for it to be right now. What with
Exactly.
all the school stuff going on, where clowns
With
are
all the.
they're basically people dressing up as clowns and stalking schoolyards and trying to lure children into the woods and stuff. And it's somebody's being a jerk and giving clowns an even worse name than they already have at this point. But,
Yeah. Well, it's funny because, when this first started, and I don't mean funny as in haha, obviously, but when this first started, some people were going, okay, is this some kind of promotional for the It remake
mm,
or something to do with Rob Zombie's next film, and they come out and say, no, this is not a publicity stunt. We're not behind this. So now some of these reportings and sightings have come out to be hoaxes, but some of them unfortunately are not.
Right.
And that's the scary thing.
I agree.
Very good choice.
Mm-hmm.
My second pick, I'm going to throw everybody for a loop, I think. It's Psycho 2. And it is not the novelization of the movie. It's in a totally different story. And the history about this was, and it was written by Robert Bloch, the man who wrote the first one and has written some other awesome stories.
Mm-hmm.
He got wind of, they were thinking about doing a sequel to Psycho. And he offered his services to write the story. And they basically turned him down. So he went ahead and wrote it anyway.
Good.
And it actually came out before the movie did. And I picked it up and I thought it was a great book. The premise is it's 20 years later. Norman is still locked up, but he's acting a little bit more like a model inmate or patient until he gets wind of that they're making a film based on his story, his life story. So he gets mad and breaks out of Salem to go stop the picture any way possible. And there's a few twists and turns in this story that I won't go into, but it's a little bit darker version of Norman than what we saw on the big screen, but it's a really good book. And unfortunately, the follow-up after that, which is called Psycho House, was unfortunately not as good. But this was a really good book. We talked about this. We talked about Psycho in our last episode, and we talked about the movie sequel. The book sequel, I think, was better. Although I do love the movie sequel.
Very nice. Bloch's work on these was also good.
Yeah. And the thing was he did this to basically voice his disdain for the slasher movies, which were obviously popular at the time. So this was him kind of doing the middle finger to them and still do a Psycho sequel.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's cool.
So, yeah.
This came out when? This came out in the 80s?
Yeah, this actually came out before the film did.
Wow, cool. I didn't know he was still working at that point.
Like I said, he did one more Psycho book called Psycho House, which unfortunately was not good. But I don't know how much more he did beyond that. So.
Yeah, he did a lot, like in the 50s and 60s. He
Right.
A lot of well-received horror stories.
Mm-hmm.
He was kind of one of the horror mainstays early on.
And he wrote a story for Star Trek, the original series.
Yeah.
Woohoo! Very nice. Mikey, what you got?
Okay. Speaking of 20th century horror, I'm going to shift gears a little bit and back this train up.
Okay.
And go back to...
Ah, you got me.
Okay.
And go back to the writer that is arguably considered, I will say that, as opposed to widely, because there are people that argue it. There are people who really despise his work, and there are those who can separate the despicable person from his often brilliant but sometimes not work, and go with H.P. Lovecraft. I actually kind of sort of got interested in Lovecraft. Probably wasn't until the 2000s, so I came to the party kind of late. But the first book of Lovecraft stories, most of his stuff is short stories. There are a couple of novels, but they don't really hold together all that well. Mostly they're either a couple of stories strung together or what would be a great short story stretched out way too long. But, so, the first book of Lovecraft stories that I picked up, the first story in that book was called The Rats in the Walls. And this was a story that was written from the point of view of a guy who was inheriting some property. He was inheriting a family estate type property. And so he writes and talks about kind of that process, and then goes to visit this place for the first time and like moves in. He's like, all right, it's my house. I'm not a wealthy person to begin with. I'm just going to go ahead and move in and it'll be fine. And then he starts hearing noises. And I mean, it's not like a drafty old castle. It's like an old house, but hearing noises in the walls. And then the story essentially follows him as he spirals into madness. And it happens fairly quickly. I mean, because it's, like I said, this is like written from his point of view, like entirely. And so you get to see his point of view on the spiraling into madness and how it all culminated, and boom. And it was, as far as reading a short story goes, it had a really big impact on me because I hadn't really experienced much of that before. Most of my experience with horror was movies. I might have read one Stephen King book by that point, but it's a very different experience. And it freaked me out a little bit. I admit it. It was really gripping. I mean, that is still one of my favorites of his, and I've read all of them. I mean, literally, I've read them all at this point, all of his stories. And that one still gets me. That one is still just creepy as hell.
Very nice.
Lovecraft was using the mind. It wasn't just a monster jump out and get you. He used the mind, like in the story you speak, and made you think about it. And it's a possibility that could happen. It's not as far-fetched as it sounds.
Well, and it's not as far-fetched as some of the other stuff that he did, like with what's referred to as the mythos.
Yes.
That's
True.
That's a way different. This is not one of those stories. That's a way different. I mean, I love those stories too, but yeah, this was a very personal story, and it was just really creepy and just really. I mean, and I've talked to people who didn't like the story, so it probably was just a personal preference thing. It just happened to be the first exposure to it, and the first one's often the sweetest. Although sweet doesn't really enter into this story, but he did a lot of groundbreaking stuff, and a lot of it was based on the idea that the human mind cannot grasp what's out there and should not grasp what's out there. It was a lot of it was, and I'll go a little inside Lovecraft's head as far as people can tell. He was a very frightened man. Just that, his psychology, he was afraid of everything. Very, very strongly racist, very much just did not like anything that was anything other than him, anything different from him. He just very, very, very fearful guy. I mean, it's almost enough to pity him to an extent. I mean, and he didn't live a particularly long or healthy life either, so there you go. But he managed to, I mean, not every story is a gem, but there are a lot of gems. And he does an amazing job at times of capturing that fear and translating it into a story.
Pretty cool.
Very nice.
Yeah, I have not read any of Lovecraft, so I may have to take a walk on the wild side one day.
You can find most of his stuff online.
Yeah.
I can't remember. I wish I could remember the URL for that the one website that's got supposedly all of his work. Let's see if I can scare it up and get it in the show notes.
There you go.
Scare it up.
Oh yeah, I didn't even. Yeah. That wasn't even intentional.
Mr. Les.
Well, my next choice is intentional. And I'm just looking at the works of Edgar Allan Poe.
Oh, yeah.
Yep.
The man that gave us the first detective story.
Mm-hmm.
and then turned around and put out such good things as The Black Cat, A Cask of Amontillado, The Red Death, so many different things that were then turned around and made into movies, mainly by Roger Corman. But Poe had a knack, uh, like, of course, now I can't think. The man you were just talking about, sorry, Mike.
Lovecraft.
Lovecraft. He was using the mind to play games, and he would be able to manipulate your thoughts with the stories and be able to scare the hell out of you. And I think like Lovecraft, it was because this stuff could happen. And well, of course, I recommend it to anybody and everybody, but it's just timeless. Yeah, the settings are dated, but the fear factor is always there.
They should be dated. He wrote in like the 1830s and 1840s, which was a good 80 years before Lovecraft even got started. So you can bet there was some influence there. Yeah.
But there you can see there's no cell phones too, so.
I don't know. There's probably a picture in there somewhere of somebody with an iPhone, but anyway.
Yeah, probably.
Or digital watch.
Yep.
Yeah, one of my favorite Poe stories has always been The Telltale Heart. Talk about your mind screw stories.
Yeah.
That's a fun one.
Yes.
I was wondering if Poe was going to be brought up tonight. Kind of glad it had been.
Oh yeah.
I figured it would, but I was just wondering who would do it. My next choice is actually from the realm of comics, and it is called 30 Days of Night.
Ah, yes.
Steve Niles and Ben Temple-Smith. One of the things I really love about comics is every once in a while you get something comes out and you go, oh God, why hadn't someone thought about this before? And vampires in Barrow, Alaska during the part of the winter where they have no sunshine. There's no sunlight at all. I'm like, okay, why hadn't someone thought about this? And it's so well executed. Such a great story. And of course, it's turned into a series of miniseries. And of course, there was a couple of films as well.
Mm-hmm.
When I first heard about it, the premise just got me. I was like I said, that's just...
Yeah, how in the hell has nobody thought of this before?
Right.
That's, yeah. Yep.
Very good choice.
Yep. Another classic.
Yep. Any other choices? Mike, I think you had one more.
I've got another one, and actually I'm
Okay.
cheating and combining into two, and they're comics.
Okay, that's okay.
I will buzz through them quickly. One is from, well, I guess the last volume was like last year, but it has been going on for a little while. And is a series of comics about a little girl who's dead and her adventures from that point on. So, and her name is Lenore, and she is obviously known as the Little Dead Girl.
Mm-hmm.
You can get them collected in, I believe it is 6, essentially trades, and they are written and drawn by Roman Dirge, and they are just a delightful combination of creepy and funny. So if that's the kind of thing that interests you, then this is definitely the way to go. My other one is not that different in that creepy funny combination, and this is definitely a little more recent. As in, these are just, I want to say issue 5 is coming out this week or next, and this is a series called Norman. And Norman is a perfectly normal 8-year-old, except for the serial killer part. And the adventures follow his class at school and their exploits and trying to figure out why people keep dropping dead. Although at this point they're pretty sure what the deal is, though they don't really talk directly about it too much. And even if they did, the teacher would do her best to cover it up because she just doesn't want any trouble. She has enough trouble on her own. She does not need these crazy kids adding to it. And again, it is an awful lot of fun for being as weird and creepy as it is.
And that
Good
is
choice.
a fun read.
Yep. Both of those are really good choices. Les, do you have any more?
Actually, I do.
Cool.
There was a series of books written in the early 2000s by Larry Mike Garman. And these are Universal Monster books. There was a series of 6 in which some kids were watching a series of movies. And when they did, they released the monsters from the movies. And in the series, you had Dracula, the Mummy, the Wolfman, Frankenstein, the Bride of Frankenstein, and the Creature from the Black Lagoon. In each book, the first book was Dracula, so they had to capture Dracula and put him back into the film world. And each time they took out one of the monsters until the final book, The Bride of Frankenstein, when there were instances or circumstances in which all the monsters were loose again. So instead of taking on one and finishing up, they had to take on all 6 and put them back in place. It's an easy read. Each book was around 220 pages, so it was a quick read. And this one I could recommend to tweens and teens as well as adults. There was nothing shady about it. It was just written for fun.
So it's basically a middle grade story.
Pretty much, yes.
Cool.
Yep. Definitely cool. Awesome. Good choices all around. Definitely all over a spectrum, which is nice. Any final thoughts before we wrap up this topic and move on to weekly picks?
I'm scared to move on to weekly picks.
Okay.
Thomas will hold your hand, Mike. Let's go now.
With that said, we will be right back. And we're back. It's time for weekly picks, and leading off is Les.
My first pick is a collection by Image Books of the story The Fade Out. This was written by Ed Brubaker, art by Sean Phillips, and I want to bring it forward. The coloring was done by Elizabeth Breitweiser. It is an excellent story. It's 1948, and a screenwriter who's suffering from PTSD wakes from a blackout and finds himself in a room with a murdered starlet. The writer then teams with his blacklisted best friend. This is real easy for me to say. His blacklisted best friend, who he is fronting for at this time too, but they band together to bring her killer to justice. This was originally a 12-issue series, and now they're coming out with the collection. They've done smaller collections of like 3 issues each, but this is the entire story. I'm kind of looking forward to this because, 1, I enjoyed the story to begin with, and 2, it would be nice to have it all in one volume.
Very cool. I am next, and my first choice is Darth Vader 25. This is the final issue, written by Kieran Gillian and Salvador LaRocca doing the art. I'll be honest, I've been honest about this from the get-go. I didn't think it would go as long as it did. I originally thought it was going to be a short run, maybe 6 issues or so, but was pleasantly surprised. It's been a very good read. I've enjoyed the handling of Vader. It's brings him back to the menace that we saw, especially in Empire. Just the general badassness, and but there's also a little bit of intrigue, and you can see some of the doubts and mistrust that Palpatine has, because he knows Vader's up to something and trying to find out what's going on and that kind of stuff. So it's been a really good run, and I hate to see it end, but it's finally coming out. This was supposed to come out about a couple of months ago, but it had been delayed. But it's over. It's actually going to be 40 pages for this issue. So obviously there was a reason, and I'm sure it's going to be worth the wait.
Big wrap up.
Yep, big wrap up. Mikey.
Alrighty. My first pick is an Image book, and it is entitled Southern Cross, and this is issue 8 that's coming out this week. And this is written by Becky Cloonan with art by Andy Belanger. And this is, we're getting into the second arc now. And this is one that I have to admit actually snuck up on me. I had been waiting excitedly for the second arc for this for a while, because they took a bit of a break after the first one, and so issue 7 snuck up on me. But I'm sneaking issue 8 in here, by golly, because this is a really cool story. The first arc was about a young woman who was traveling to Titan to pick up her sister's remains. Basically, she had been killed in an accident, was what they had told her. And so she was on her way out there to kind of just take a look for herself and see what was going on. And the story got strange from there, but in a really cool way. And the second arc, the ship, the title Southern Cross comes from the name of the ship that she was traveling on. It disappeared. And so the second arc is now other people essentially trying to figure out what happened to the ship. And so we're getting into that story, and it's just as cool as the first one.
Very cool.
Yep. Awesome. Les?
I picked Reborn, #1, an Image book. The premise is, where do you go when you die? In this story, they tell you that you're not necessarily going to heaven or hell, but rather somewhere you have to fight to survive. Somewhere where people from your past are waiting for you, both the good and the bad. This is a story brought to you by Mark Millar and art with Greg Capullo. I want to get this because it's Millar and Capullo to start. It's a more or less a free-form title. It's not going to be tied to any universe or anything like that. And I think the idea of a purgatory look at life after death is going to be a lot of fun to wade through. I'm saying wade because you've got the possibility of both the good and the bad harming you. So I'm ready for this one.
Yeah, sounds real good.
Does sound cool.
I know Capullo's been very excited about this. He's talked about it a lot on Twitter, and if I'm not mistaken, he's talking about this being some of his best work, or he's making either he made comments about that or someone's been making comments about it. So it'll definitely be interesting to take a look at, and I do like the premise. Okay, my next choice is from our friends at Zenscope, and is Grim Fairy Tales, the Halloween special for 2016.
Woo!
So this is an anthology. Obviously, it's going to be of course, just in time for Halloween. Anthology book of different tales involving all the heroes we know, Robin and Brittany and some of the others. Although I think they're telling tales, it's not so much stories that they're involved with, but it could be. always love getting the holiday specials, whether it's the Halloween or the they don't really call them Christmas specials anymore. They call them holiday specials, and there may be something for Valentine's. So I'm always a sucker for these, and this ought to be fun. It's our friends from Zenscope, so it ought to be a hoot.
Yep, they usually include some fun stuff in those things.
Yep.
I fall for those also.
Yeah. Mikey.
All right. I got another image book this week because apparently that's how I roll. But see, as I said before, Southern Cross snuck up on me, and so I didn't catch the first issue of the second arc until after the show. But I'm on top of it with Monstrous. Number 7 is coming out this week. We are back with the second arc. If you're not familiar with Monstrous, it is about a young lady who, in a kind of a steampunk fantasy type world, has got what can only be described as a monster inside her. And the whole first arc is them basically weaving this background story of how that happened and how her mother was involved and how her people have been oppressed and enslaved and honestly butchered. And it's an epic tale, and it's also beautifully drawn by Sana Takada, written by Marjorie Liu. And so now we're getting a second arc, and it is going to be a whole lot of fun to see where this goes and where the world takes them.
Some great artwork in this one.
Oh,
Yeah.
man, seriously.
I know that there's a lot of people looking for this issue to come out. They've been chomping at the bit for the new story arc, so I know there's going to be a lot of people excited about this.
Mm-hmm.
Good choices all around, as always. Any honorable mentions? Didn't ask about that. There doesn't have to be one.
The only thing I have is the number 6 issue of Fix from Image.
That was actually one of the ones I was thinking.
Written by Nick Spencer, art by Steve Lieber. I love the write-up they have for it. Ray investigates a high-profile murder. It's pretty succinct.
Yeah. Right.
But if you've read this stuff, it's pretty funny stuff too. It's well done, especially when the dog talks. So I would say they're probably going to come out with a collection of the first 5 issues, and this will be something to add on to it.
Cool.
Mm-hmm. And there's also a new October Faction series starting this week. It's called October Faction Deadly Season. If you're into that sort of thing, it's an IDW book. It's written by Steve Niles with art by Damian Worm. Another cool horror-ish book that's out there.
October Faction is a good run.
Yep.
Alrighty. Any special mentions? Any special shout-outs or mentions?
I have one.
Oh, okay.
I received a copy of the new Christopher Ming movie. We talked about it, I believe, once before. It's called We're Skeeto, Nazi Hunter. I'm looking forward to watching this because on the cover it says the most controversial film ever made.
That's a boast.
It is.
And also presented in shocking plasmoscope. I'm looking forward to this because I think before we discussed, I went to see The Monster of Phantom Lake, and I was lucky enough to meet the gentleman and forward some money so I could get this copy. I'm looking forward to watching it now because these are tongue-in-cheek, funny movies. They definitely don't take themselves seriously, but I think he's got 11 movies out, and I think this is his 11th. So this should be entertaining at the least. I think it's going to be hysterical.
Cool. So we can look forward to a review of that coming soon.
Mm-hmm.
Hopefully so, yeah.
Oh, you ought to bring it up to the store for movie night.
I made a reference to that to your boss, and he was thinking maybe so, and he needs to promote it. And I thought, well, okay, let's go.
Let's go. Alrighty. Sounds cool.
In fact, I would wait till everybody got to see it and get a response from them before we make a judgment on it.
No, let's just surprise it on them.
What's it rated? Is it rated?
I don't think it is. Let me double check, though, okay? Pull it up here. It shows no rating.
All right, cool.
Yep, not rated. So it's a black and white widescreen.
Cool.
Should be fun.
I think so.
I sure hope so.
Alrighty. Any other shout-outs?
Nothing springing to mind.
Okay. On that note, I will do our usual, of course, Manny the Martyr for our awesome music that you hear each week, or unless you're doing a binge listen, which, well, you're a brave person. You hear back to back to back to back.
There's only so much of me I can take. I don't know about you guys.
So we thank them for allowing us to use their awesome song.
It still gets stuck in my head every time I'm editing the show.
I bet.
It sticks in my head. It sticks in my head for hours afterwards, every time, and that's still not a bad thing.
Of course, our Potter and Family mates on Twitter, hashtag Potter and Family. Shout out to them for always spreading the word of the fellowship and retweeting our links. And Mikey and I do our darndest to return that love. Thank you guys. Of course, Jake and Tom's always the first one out there. And shout out to you guys for being so supportive. And I'm not saying that the other podcasts aren't, but I know that they do. So thank you guys, and thank you to everybody who spreads the word of the show. It's much appreciated. I really suggest you, dear listeners, to you don't have to have a Twitter account, but head over to Twitter and just do a search, hashtag Potter and Family, and you'll find a wonderful list of incredible podcasts on any subject you can think of. I'm sure there's a podcast on it, so check it out. And then, of course, shout out to you, dear listeners. Thank you for downloading and listening to our shows. It's very much appreciated. We encourage you to go to the sites of your choice that you download our show, whether it's Stitcher or iTunes or Google Play, and please give us a rating, and if you feel so, give us a review. It would be much appreciated. Let them know what you think about us. Preferably good, but if you have some criticisms, hey, we want to hear it.
We're okay with that. We're willing to
we want to.
You're going to give us some advice that might improve our show? Hey, guess what? Yes, we want to hear that.
Yes, we definitely want to hear that.
We're good with that idea.
And if you want to communicate with us through other means, of course, we have contact us on our About Us page on the website, www.thefellowshipofthegeeks.net. Of course, traditional email at thefellowshipofthegeeks.net. Or you can contact us via social media. We are on Facebook, The Fellowship of the Geeks. We are on Twitter, at Fellowship Geeks, obviously. Mikey has his own personal Twitter account, at Mikey Geek. And I have one as well, at Tom TC Geek. And I almost forgot, Mike, I'm sure Mikey was going to bring it up. You can also listen to our podcast on YouTube.
I sure was going to bring that up.
That is a new thing, so check that out. If YouTube is how you would like to listen to our show, and of course we have our some of our recordings from our webcast days a few years ago. Feel free to check those out and see what you think about those, and of course comments and rate and thumbs up or thumbs down if you feel you must. Just let us know what you think.
Right. Let us know what you think on just find us on social media. Like I said, you got all the Facebook and Twitter stuff now. And if there's a particular story that's always creeped you out, hey, tell us about that too. We'd love to chat.
Yeah, we definitely be interested.
Yeah, please do.
Any final thoughts before we wrap things up?
No, just thanks everybody.
That is what I would say too.
Awesome. Thank you, everybody. Thank you once again for listening. Y'all have a good week. Y'all take care. And until next time, read more comics and support your local stores. We thank you for listening to the show. Comments, suggestions, and questions can be sent to email@thefellowshipofthegeeks.net. You can follow us on Facebook at The Fellowship of the Geeks and on Twitter at Fellowship Geeks. Until next time,